I'd like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure whether there is a consistent approach across all housing authorities to intervene to avoid evictions, and A, what it is, and B, whether his department will review this matter.
Mr Harmer to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. The avoidance of an eviction is an absolute priority of any housing authority. As a member would expect, there are a number of stages that housing providers will go through before the formal legal process of eviction is commenced. The Department has no powers to stop a housing authority from seeking an eviction, which is ultimately a court decision, nor can it prevent a housing authority from taking legitimate action against a tenant. However, the Department has issued best practice guidance on public sector evictions to all housing authorities and collates quarterly data on housing quality performance. Turning to the second part of the question, I suspect the Honourable Member's question was at least in part prompted by the recent report of a tragic outcome following an eviction from public sector housing. I have asked officers to inquire into the matter and confirmed that on initial review it appears that due process was properly followed by the landlord concerned. I have, however, made sure that eviction guidance was reissued to all housing providers, as well as a reminder of standards expected by public sector landlords. We will review this matter further, and I can assure honourable members, this honourable court, that the department will continue to work with public housing providers in order to try and ensure that something like this does not happen again.
Mr Cretney.
Yes, thank you, and thank the Minister. Would he agree with me that it's very important that all the agencies of government and local authorities work together in relation to such matters? And secondly, would he agree with me also that when a tenant is being contacted by a local authority, that it's very important that there's a personal visit rather than just correspondence? And I hope that the advice he's offered would share that kind of thing with the local authorities.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I agree. It's absolutely vital that we work together, and obviously I believe there's a more generalised adult social care provision concept as well to support vulnerable individuals who are not elderly or who have a learning disability, for example, and it's whether that review can take it. But I do agree that we need to review, and to ensure that in that review that visits are a key part of that process.
Mrs Paul Moulton.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister confirm, he referred to best practice guidance, can he confirm that whether in the light of the Equality Act, does that best practice guidance include a process for assessing and making reasonable adjustments in the case of tenants with disabilities before beginning the eviction process?
Minister.
Thank you, and it's because I don't have the answer to that question I've asked for a review to check that exactly, that we are doing absolutely the right thing in the case of vulnerable people.
Supplementary, Mr Henderson.
Would the Shafeshok, given the tragic circumstances of the cases just mentioned, a gentleman called Ross Ward, who I personally knew, as it happens, would he be willing to refer the matter to the Social Issues Committee, perhaps, for a general overview of this and other situations? And would he accept, given that the information disseminated by Greyer in particular with this case, that we examine the systems in place and the coordinated approach between all systems, so that to test out the joined up nature of what we had in place there, and in other scenarios that we can perhaps produce a better socially acceptable policy?
Mr Harmer.
Thank you, Mr President. I think in the case that the member for Legislative Council has highlighted, I think it's absolutely something we need to do. We're reviewing it at the moment, so on the mechanism of which committee will want to take that out, but I think there's definitely a space where vulnerable people need to be dealt appropriately, and having a set of rules, which I can go through the stages here, don't necessarily apply, or perhaps we need to be better working together, and I think I'll take that point.
Honourable Member Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. I'm really glad to hear the Minister finally acknowledge that not everyone fits into a neat set of black and white rules that a system will design for them. My question for the Minister is, he said that the Department doesn't have the power to set out eviction policy, essentially. He's got guidance and guidelines he talks about in best practice, but not actually the power to set this policy. But as part of the Department's fixed-term tenancy policy, they do have eviction criteria. If you exceed a certain financial threshold, if your assets exceed a certain amount, the Department has mandated under this policy that you will be evicted from your local authority public sector house. So those two statements don't seem to correlate for me. So would the Minister just clarify that actually the Department either does or doesn't have the power to insist local authorities follow this sort of eviction process? And if they do have the ability to mandate a standardised eviction process, like you said, that's a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more caring, why is the Department not doing that?
Mr. Harmer.
Thank you. I think we're talking in two different scenarios. I think I was talking about vulnerable people, which I absolutely do think. I think where we're talking about the current fixed-term tenant policy, which is separate, is about those people that have the means to pay, that have a higher salary, and that is very much a different in terms of setting a new tenancy agreement. I think where I was talking about review is very much around vulnerability and those sort of issues.
Mr. Cretney.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Could I ask the Minister, when such review is completed, is it his intention to share that with honourable members so that we can all see if there are more positive ways for the future? And secondly, I can confirm to him that the Social Affairs Policy Review Committee has already initially considered this matter, but I think it would be helpful for us to undertake any further action after his review is completed.
Mr. Harmer.
Thank you. Yes, I would be very willing and would welcome to share that information with the committee and with members.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is just purely on a point of order. I may be wrong, but I was led to believe that the Coroner's Court were looking into. Unfortunately, the gentleman was named in these proceedings, and I didn't know if we don't want to interfere with a report that's taking place into this, and I think maybe we should be careful of our comments until that report is published.
In the public domain, actually.
My understanding is that the issue is already in the public domain and not subject to sub judice. Were that so, we would certainly not be referring to individual cases.